everybody, today I'm back and today I'm going to be doing something of a catch-up because you may have noticed it has been 7 months since I last posted on this channel, which essentially is entirely my fault. I was getting a little bit burned out. I felt between reading for work, reading for this, reading what I wanted to read anyway, it was all just becoming quite hard work and I wasn't enjoying reading as much and I needed to kind of refocus on that. Tie into that the fact that my laptop broke and I had for a long time no way of doing any of this. I kind of decided a little break might not be the worst thing. But lo and behold, I am back and I am raring to go with a lot more books for you guys. And what better way to come back than with that staple of Booktube, a book haul. So it might not surprise you to know that in 7 months, I've got one hell of a lot of books. So I'm not going to be doing a 3-hour long book haul today and showing you all of them. I'm going to be showing you some of my highlights today, then I'm going to do another couple of book hauls over the next few weeks or so to really fill you in on what you've missed. So when I was growing up, basically everything I read was YA fantasy, Garth Nix, those kinds of things. Till I was about 17, that's all I'd read. And then when I was 17, I broadened out and started reading non-fiction and general fiction and kind of left my YA fantasy roots behind. But I've just started a new job and basically everyone that I work with is a little bit obsessed with YA fantasy. And so that's encouraged me to get back into it again. In fact, we're going to be doing a monthly book club. And so that's really going to get me to pick up some of the new YA fantasy stuff and things I've missed since I was a teenager. And the first one we're talking about is This Savage Song by V.E. Schwab. So V.E. Schwab wrote A Dark Shade of Magic, which was a huge series, which admittedly I haven't read, but I have seen everywhere on Booktube, online, just everyone is talking about it, and they loved it. So this is a new series, and I was really excited to get stuck into this. It's kind of half fantasy, half dystopia. It's basically set in a kind of civil war-torn city, but basically the defining factor of this city is that there are monsters. 3 different types of really dark, quite gritty, really grim monsters that kind of plague the city as well. So there's kind of a lot of that factored in, but it's the kind of dystopia civil war element mixed with this more fantasy element of these monsters. And it sounds like it's going to be really interesting. It's a really cool cover, and after everything else I've heard about V. Schwab, I'm super excited to get stuck in. So next up are a couple of more literary books, which I'm going to be talking about a lot on the channel in the next few weeks, because there's loads of interesting themes and things about them, and they're books that have had a lot of hype, and I think are really interesting. And the first of those is Kamila Shamsi's Homefire. So this was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize recently. Kamila Shamsi's won loads of awards in the past, and she's just a really interesting writer. And this is something completely different. It's basically a combination of the myth of Antigone, retold in a modern setting with kind of extremism as one of the central themes. So it's essentially about a family. It's 2 sisters and a brother, and the brother basically gets recruited to go to the Middle East and get involved in the kind of extremist fight over there, and about the impact that has on the family left behind and how they all view it. And it's tied into things about identity and nationalism and religion and how different people identify differently with the same thing. It's a really interesting, clever book, and it's a very clever way of reworking the myth. And I think it's just a really interesting one, and I'm really pleased to see it got longlisted for the Booker Prize, because it's one of those ones that's quite interesting. I think a lot of people will be talking about. The next one is one I'm very excited about, and I know a lot of people who are also excited about. And that's Cersei by Madeline Miller. So Madeline Miller wrote The Song of Achilles, and I don't know anybody that I've spoken to who's read The Song of Achilles and didn't love it. It's like one of the most universally highly regarded books I've ever heard of. I hadn't read it until recently, and I absolutely loved it. And this is her highly anticipated follow-up. It's very similar in theme. It's basically another retelling of a classic myth. In this case, it's the myth of Cersei, who's a witch who essentially gets exiled to an island, one of those classic islands that people can't find unless magical things are going on. And it's basically just her story. And it interweaves with loads of other myths, things like Odysseus and the myths regarding Troy, and just loads of interesting little elements like that. It deals a lot with gods and titans, and it's great if you know mythology. It's got loads of little tidbits in there. But if you don't know mythology, you don't need to. It makes it a really personal, interesting story. And this is going to be such a big book next year. After she won the Bailey's Prize with the Song of Achilles, it really won't surprise me if this also does really well, and it's going to be massive. It comes out next May. So next up is some gothic horror, and so this isn't a genre I normally go for, mainly because I'm a massive wimp, but this is a book that really caught my attention. It's got a beautiful jacket, and I think it's going to be really good for this kind of autumn time, and that's The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. So as you'll see, beautiful. And essentially it's set in the 19th century, and it's about a widow whose husband just died. She moves to his crumbling country estate and finds it really decrepit, and it's got some quite mean staff, and it's just not got a very nice vibe about the place. Elsie, the main character, finds a locked door into the attic, breaks it down, and in there finds a silent companion. Now, a silent companion is essentially an old-fashioned equivalent of the kind of cardboard cutouts of Justin Bieber you get nowadays, but a bit creepier. So they're basically just wooden figures of people, but they look really lifelike. So as an example, this kind of thing. So as you can imagine, it's quite creepy to start with, but essentially, Elsie loves these. She starts putting them around the house, and then they start kind of moving location. She finds them in different places. They start to adopt different poses, and is someone playing tricks with her? Is it the staff that she doesn't really get on with anyway? There's a lot of kind of like psychological twist to it, but it's got a really interesting gothic atmosphere. And when it's so pretty, I think this could be a really big book this autumn. The last 3 books are in my undoubted favourite genre of book in the world, and that's medical non-fiction. So I've talked on this channel loads about Do No Harm by Henry Marsh, about Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, a whole host of others. And this summer there's been a whole gluttony of these kind of things come out, and I'm so happy by it, I can't tell you. So the first one is Admissions by Henry Marsh. So this is the guy who wrote Do No Harm, which is one of my favourite books ever. Really interesting look at brain surgery and the kind of philosophical questions as a surgeon of what you're doing. This is the follow-up, and essentially this is a bit more of a biography of the guy, Henry Marsh himself. It looks at his career, how he's starting to deal with coming to the end of his career, what he's going to do afterwards, what the kind of current state of neurosurgery is nowadays. It's just a really interesting look at what it's like to be a doctor. There's kind of a lot less of the medical stuff. There's a lot less anecdotes about cases in this, and a lot more discussion about his thoughts on things, which is interesting. Quite different to Do No Harm as well, so I think it's a really interesting one if you want to look at the sides of what it's like to be a doctor. In much the same way, this is a book that really is really zeitgeisty and on the nose of what it is like to be a doctor in the modern NHS. And that's Your Life in My Hands by Rachel Clark. So this has got loads of coverage this summer. Rachel Clark was one of the main people in the junior doctor strike and the kind of rebellion against the government's efforts to retweak the contracts and kind of change the way the NHS is working to a 7-day service, etc. And she is a fascinating person. She's got an absolutely incredible writing style. She really knows her stuff. She's really passionate about it, and that comes through. And this book is essentially her experience as a junior doctor, the stuff she's been through, the people she's dealt with, the times that the system has let people down because of the strains on the system, the ways that the system's going to continue going downhill if things carry on as they are. It's really interesting, really political, which I thought might put me off to start with, but actually it is so convincing. It makes you so angry. There are points I've had to put it down because I was like, are you kidding me? That cannot be what actually happens. But it's just so interesting, and I think anybody that cares about the NHS or has got a passing interest in what it's like to be a doctor, this is one to read. The last of the medical non-fiction I've got then is one that's quite different. That's This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. So this is currently everywhere and fully deserving of it because it's a very funny look at what it's like to be a doctor. It takes the form of the diaries that Adam wrote when he was a junior doctor, and it's lots of little anecdotes and tidbits from his experience growing up as a doctor, learning to train as a doctor, picking his speciality, working in obs and gynae. It's just a really interesting look at that with so much dark humour about blood, places that people put objects that they shouldn't put. Just really interesting stuff that you can imagine at the time is horrifying. And reading it back, and especially in Adam's voice, is so funny. I think if you've not heard about this book, look it up. And if you've not had a chance to read it, do. Because it's so funny and it's so different, but it also really makes you think about the state of the NHS and what it's like to be a doctor. And I think it's a really interesting addition to the whole genre of medical non-fiction. So there we have it. That's my first batch of books. This is kind of some of the biggest, most exciting books that I have had in the past 7 months. Things that I've really enjoyed getting to grips with, that I've enjoyed reading, and stuff that I'm really excited to talk to you a lot more about on the channel going forward. Other than that, thanks so much for watching. I'm so glad to be back. I can't wait to be posting loads of brand new content for you guys. I've got some really exciting stuff coming up and a really broad mixture of things branching out to new genres and new types of video, and I'm really excited to share that with you guys going forward. So much easier. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you soon with my next video.